I know it's been said a million times at this point, but I really can't overstate just how refreshing it is when a game like Hi-Fi Rush comes along. A consistently quality 9-ish hour long romp through a fun world with likable characters and gameplay that manages to stay fresh all the way throughout through a brilliantly tuned difficulty curve and decently deep combat mechanics. Wow, that sure is the entire verdict of this and every other review video on this game spoiled in the first 30 seconds. Did it really take me 2 months to say that? In all seriousness, this game's been out for at least 3 months at this point, and its primary marketing strategy was to rely on word of mouth, so chances are you've already heard all about this game whether you wanted to or not. That puts me in an annoying position trying to write this script, because there's only so many times you can hear, "It belongs on the Dreamcast," before you want to break a Sega Pro Bash fishing controller over someone's head, so I'm going to take this in a bit of a different direction. We'll start with a brief, spoiler-free overview of general mechanics and story to get everyone up to speed, before taking a closer look at this game's combat mechanics and how they're all executed. Sound good? Awesome. Knew I could count on you. Loving the new haircut, by the way. It's so I don't care what anyone thinks of me, you know? Anyway, let's get started. Hi-Fi Rush is a blend of rhythm game and spectacle fighter. Character action, stylish check, whatever you want to call it. You attack, dodge, and block to the beat of the music playing throughout each level. Enemies also perform all of their actions on beat, so fights often have a very natural feeling back and forth dynamic as you rhythmically alternate between dishing out damage and defending against incoming attacks. It's a natural fit. As a longtime fan of stylish action games, I regularly find myself playing to the rhythm of whatever music I happen to be listening to anyway. Hell, one of the most celebrated pastimes in the stylish action game community is basically making AMV combo videos. Check it out, I've even been in a few myself. I think they're pretty cool. Honestly though, I'm kinda surprised this hasn't been done before. At least to my knowledge. Sure, we get the occasional rhythm game hybrid. BPM, Crypto the Necrodancer, Kawaii Dethu Desu? What? A Morse code trainer? Who the fuck? Anyway, last thing that we got that was remotely like this was No Straight Roads, which was fine and all, some really cool boss fights, but that should be expected considering it was a boss rush kind of game, not a traditional spectacle fighter. That's not a bad thing on its own, but it does mean that the combat system needs to be built for that specific purpose, meaning no crazy juggles or complicated combos or really any way to completely style on your opponent since a boss fight sorta necessitates a constant back and forth struggle. Hi-Fi doesn't have that restriction with its combat. It's a stylish action game through and through, and at the best of times all the elements tie together seamlessly to create a game feel that seems to actively try to pull you into a flow state at every opportunity. What doesn't work quite as well is the platforming, somewhat surprisingly. As you might expect, like the combat, all the platforming elements move in time with the beat. Platforms shift along rails, vents swing open and shut, lasers turn on and off, all to the rhythm of the music, and it all looks and sounds great. The way the level itself will add layers of percussion to the track playing in the background through beeps, clicks, and explosions really helps to give each level and even individual sections within each level a nice sense of identity. The problem comes in on the player input side of things. You can jump and dash on the beat all you want, and doing so feels just right in a vacuum, but because your movement isn't on a set track and you're focused more on timing than positioning, there's no guarantee that your jumps and dashes will be spaced properly to clear obstacles. If you allow yourself to just hypnotically follow the music for all of your actions, you'll inevitably misjudge several jumps and fall into pits, potentially multiple times in a row until you manage to stop Pied Piping yourself, you weirdo, and just jump when you're actually supposed to cross the gap. It's funny, one of the biggest problems with these sections is that it succeeds too well at the rhythm gameplay. Other than that, the only other complaint I could reasonably expect to see about these parts is that they can run a bit long before letting you get to the next fight. Even then, that's hardly an issue at all in an initial playthrough because those long breaks from combat are filled with surprisingly charming character interaction. I'm an impatient, judgmental asshole and a terminal recluse. There are very few things that kill my buzz faster than annoying, overly chatty NPCs, and when I first saw the trailer for this game, it's the one thing I was most worried about getting in the way of my enjoyment of it.
Yep, that's me. And you're probably wondering how I ended up here.
Like, Jesus, here we go. Here comes the non-stop self-aware comedy. But no, actually. It turns out both the humor and character writing in this game are pretty well done. horribly obnoxious references notwithstanding. The way the player character and his posse of misfits bond and develop a proper team dynamic over the course of the story, while not amazing, is done well enough that by the time everyone's concluded their arc, it's easy to buy into the whole me and the boys on our way to fuck up Jeff Bezos vibe the game is going for. And the way each of the game's bosses antagonize you over the intercom and the levels leading up to their fights does a good job at establishing their individual personalities and building up to your eventual confrontation with them. As for the story itself, it's alright. You are Chai, a goofball slacker and wannabe rock star who, while undergoing a procedure to replace his broken arm with a robotic prosthetic, is accidentally granted musical superpowers due to a mysterious ancient device falling into the McSurgery press. He meets up with Peppermint, a short-tempered genius roboticist with a robot cat, and together they set out to take down Amazon Dynamics and their cartoonishly evil department heads. It's the classic tale of scrappy underdogs on a quest to burn corpo shit. Not exactly groundbreaking in terms of narrative, but it is very reliably fun. That's not to say that there's nothing to be found beneath the surface, of course. There are the obvious themes regarding the importance of humility and hard work, sure. But if I had to look deeper, I'd say a lot of the game can be seen as an allegory for modern game development, seeing as how several characters have motivations that essentially boil down to, I just want to make something I can be proud of without it being tainted and ruined by corporate greed. As well as several of the antagonists seeking to achieve their goals through unethical tactics that have clear parallels in the modern games industry. Things like mandatory crunch time and psychologically manipulative practices. All that being said, I'd rather not spoil too much of the story for the few of you watching who haven't played it yet. And I'd take my reading of it with a grain of salt anyway, since I'm an idiot and my every attempt at literary analysis typically ends with a nosebleed so heavy it puts bullet wounds to shame. There, general thoughts over. It's a fantastic game that everyone should play. From here on out, I'm going to go into the nitty-gritty about the combat mechanics, because I'm a massive combat snob and I can't be given a letter grade during a fight without compulsively picking apart systems with a fine-tooth comb in one hand and a chainsaw in the other. I'm not going to go further into the story, but any and all gameplay mechanics are open season from here on out, so if you want to avoid potential spoilers on that front, then this is your stop. I'd say go check out the rest of my stuff, but at the time of recording, my channel's kinda barren, so here, have this. As I said, in combat, everything important happens on the beat. Your attacks, enemy attacks, and even the occasional environmental hazard. But what's important about making a system like this feel immediately approachable and fun instead of frustrating is decoupling failure and rhythm from failure in combat. You can have the timing of a broken metronome with cardiac arrhythmia and still do well in fights because the game acknowledges that it's pretty unreasonable to expect perfect performance in a mosh pit. Inputting your attacks in time with the beat rewards you with increased damage, flashier visuals, and an invisible crowd chanting your name. Whereas mistiming your inputs at worst punishes you with a lower score and makes your attacks come out kinda sluggish in a way that's hard to illustrate, but very noticeable when you're playing yourself. So it creates some intrinsic motivation to play with better timing so the game just feels better overall. The majority of Chai's moveset comes in the form of dial combos, i.e. preset strings of light and heavy attacks that perform a unique sequence of actions that are inaccessible outside of their respective combos. Each combo terminates in a finishing move called a beat hit, which is what these weird little circle things are about. You need to wait a beat at the end of your combo before hitting an attack button to line up the circles and perform the combo finisher. The timing for these finishers is really generous, and you're not penalized for mashing as long as you hit the button when the circles are lined up. I have to imagine they work like this so the big powerful hit at the end of your combos has a little bit of extra time to wind up for that explosive payoff. Really adds some extra oomph to it. Feels great. What's weird about it though is that the game implies that you can only do this because of your robot cat friend. Like, how does that work? I mean, I guess it's kinda cool, you know? Like, way better than my cat. All he does is scream at me and piss in my sink. Anyway, the way the dial combos work paired with the superpowered finishing moves is kinda reminiscent of Bayonetta's combat system, though there are some clear differences in the way their combos are designed. Bayonetta is all about using dodge, offset, and witch time to weave her combos between enemy attacks, so things like enemy displacement and crowd control will oftentimes take some work to access. You need to prove that you can dance through the danger before you're allowed to really show off and style on anyone. Chai, on the other hand, doesn't have access to anything like dodge offset, meaning that if the combat is to have any hope of ever feeling smooth and fluid, his moveset needs to have a degree of inherent defensive utility outside of his dedicated defensive options, which thankfully it does. Many of Chai's combos incorporate some form of player displacement, enemy displacement, or both. So if you're mindful of the situation you're in, you can slide or hop out of the way of enemy attacks mid-combo and continue your offense uninterrupted. Once you've got a juggle going, your air combos allow you to either stay in the air, bring your enemy and yourself back down to the ground, or land on the ground while simultaneously relaunching your enemy. Each combo has a unique function, even if only slightly, and it gives them each a more defined utility and place among the whole of Chai's kit. And it's funny that I'm phrasing that as praise because it just so happens that that's the exact problem I have with the way the assists work. As you progress through the story, the characters Chai meets and befriends will make themselves available for use in levels by way of fighting game style assists. These attacks have use cases that are so strictly defined that the majority of them are essentially problem solvers with very little flexibility in their function. Blue pops shields, green breaks armor, and red runs damage control when your lead actor is allowed on social media unsupervised. The thing is, for having such specialized skill sets and defined jobs to do, you'd kinda hope your Pokemon would prioritize actually doing those things. Unfortunately, there's no lock-on button, so when the mean green machine decides he would rather shatter the jaw of a Roomba that passed too close instead of helping out with that tank that's barreling towards you, you're just gonna have to hold that L. And now that he's on cooldown for the next 5 seconds, you'll have plenty of time to finish the job he started, assuming you don't mind dodging mortar shells while you do it. They try to expand on the utility of the assist by giving them different contextual moves depending on when you call them in. Follow up a parry with an assist for a high damage counter that homes in on the enemy that attacked you. Hold the assist button for a slower attack that either focuses on crowd control or, in the case of Tank Girl, doing what her normal assist does but infinitely worse. Finally, you can call an assist at the end of any of your combos to replace your finisher with what they call a jam attack, which is a high damage invincible team attack that serves as an easy combo extension button. Each assist has 2 jam attacks, and depending on which you use, you can transfer from grounded combos into the air, air to ground, or stay where you are. On top of all that, they're not limited by the assist cooldowns, so you can pretty much call them in whenever, assuming the assist character isn't already on field doing something else, like menacing empty space or trampling a family of speaking spells. So then, you might be wondering, what's to stop you from using jam combos to infinitely combo everything, thus completely trivializing the combat? Well, like most spectacle fighters, this game has a super meter, though here it's called the reverb gauge. Predictably, jam attacks are tied to it, but so are Chai's more powerful special moves. Jam attacks only cost a single chunk of gauge, while specials can cost up to 4, depending on which ones you have equipped. On its face, it seems like pretty basic resource management, and for the most part it is. You can use small bits of your gauge on jam attacks and low-level specials, or you can save up to clear rooms with something more devastating. What's particularly smart about it all, however, is how meter gain is balanced. Unlike most games, you don't gain meter just by hitting enemies. You need to pick up batteries dropped by enemies to fill your gauge. That sounds annoying, right? Like you're tying your ability to have fun to RNG. Kinda like how in KH2 you can't use your drive forms unless you pick up enough orbs first. That sucks, man. I just want to go Super Saiyan and beat on some shadow monsters, but I gotta spend like half an hour picking up their fucking anal beads first. It's a drag. But actually, what you might not know is that when you use up all of your mana and it goes into recharge, all of Sora's attacks start generating a ton of drive gauge. This one little tweak completely changes the way that you think about these 2 meters. Now, instead of waiting for either one of them to be filled passively, you can start making the decision to spend one to recharge the other, and, oh, wait, hang on. Right, so what I mean to say is that enemies will always drop batteries when you land beat hits, meaning you need to choose between building your meter with a standard finisher or spending it with a jam attack. You can't do both. Already, we've got a pretty engaging system here. Plenty of decision-making opportunities for how and when to spend your meter. But what really ties it all together is how the scoring system plays into it. See, each fight in the game grades you on points earned, time taken, and your ability to keep to the rhythm. The S-rank requirements for the latter 2 are both intuitive and surprisingly generous, but the score requirements for S-ranking the first category are pretty tough. I'm pretty good at both rhythm and action games, so when I went in I was sorta expecting S ranks all around, but actually I got a ton of A and B ranks for score because I wasn't using certain mechanics to their fullest. Jam attacks have this special property in that if they would kill an enemy, it instead puts them in a special state where they can live with 0 hit points for the next few hits of your combo. This can be chained over and over as long as you have the meter for it, and continuing a combo in this state gives you a pretty sizable overkill bonus to your score. Plus, obviously, longer combos earn more points. This mechanic is key in getting more than just a passing grade in score. It's not perfect. It can be pretty frustrating accidentally killing an enemy right before doing a jam attack so you use up the meter and get nothing out of it, but it's not too hard to feel out how much health enemies have most of the time, and it's pretty reliably satisfying when you pull it off. All that, combined with the fact that your reverb gauge gets completely drained after each fight regardless of whether or not you use it, means that you're really being pushed towards this flow of building up meter across the duration of a fight and cashing it all out at the end for one big finale. Sounds great, right? Multiple subtle mechanics are working in tandem to actively push you to play in the most fun and satisfying way, yeah? Yeah. We'll get back to that. Now then, much like a cannon on the set of Jackass, a combat system is only as good as the horde of pricks you have to point it at. So how does Hi-Fi stack up? Well, better than you might expect, considering Tango Gameworks' catalog of 3.5 games play nothing like Hi-Fi Rush, I assume, and thus would have very different priorities in enemy design. In true spectacle fighter fashion, we've got a full spectrum ranging from near perfect to horrible mistake, though mercifully charting them all out would reveal less of a bell curve and more of a half pipe made by a blind man. You've got a pretty standard spread of lights, mediums, and heavies filling out the ranks, with each progressive tier being capable of taking and dealing more damage than the last. So far so basic, but something that I think is worth noting is how well this game avoids the more common pitfalls of this kind of enemy design. First off is that lights don't ever become obsolete. They escalate in strength throughout the game just like everything else, and the way their AI positions them to flank or snipe you regularly means you actually need to think about how you're dealing with higher priority threats so you don't get lit up by the peanut gallery. They'll consistently harass you just enough so that you'll never quite get completely swarmed, but you'll still need to make the most of Chai's bouncy and evasive combos to stay on top. Another nice detail is that heavies aren't juggle-proof tanks that just sit there and spam annoying bullshit at you while you whittle away at their mile-long health bar. They can be comboed just like everything else once you break through their defenses. Many of them can't be hit until their armor or shield or sense of self-worth has been broken by an assist, and considering that's coupled with a cooldown time, you'd think that'd be a design sense so heinous it warrants corporal punishment. But I give it a tentative pass, since you typically only need to break an enemy's defenses once, and you can actually use special moves to get the job done as well if you've got the meter to burn, which feeds back into the decision-making opportunities presented by the reverb gauge. Unfortunately, as I alluded to earlier, this roster isn't without its blunders. These birds in particular exist as a sort of horrible singularity that absorbed almost all of the bad qualities about every other existing enemy in the game. We've got a sizable gallery of annoying bullshit on display here. We've got slow-moving, unblockable homing projectiles, widespread carpet bombs that don't have a telegraphed explosion, a swooping melee combo that telegraphs 2 hits then hits you with 3, a spinning laser backflip that has infinite range and doesn't stop until you're certain the AI is broken completely, and a horribly awkward drill attack that has the enemy spinning in place while slowly drifting towards you, only to ram into you with a sudden burst of speed that, surprise surprise, isn't telegraphed at all, and repeats multiple times before ending with the enemy breaking its own stamina somewhere far off in a corner, allowing you to close in and get 2 whole free hits before it picks itself back up and fucks off again. Goody. If that sounds a touch too reasonable for you, don't worry. For the discerning soap chewers in the audience, we can set this bitch on fire and immediately make things 10 times worse. This member of the DK crew comes with explosive lasers, napalm carpet bombs, an incredibly quick swooping spin attack, and most importantly, the signature drifting drill attack from his little bro, because evidently the urge to ruin my day runs in the family. These flying fucking war crimes are so desperate for your attention and mesh so poorly with every other enemy in the lineup, it almost feels like they'd fit better as a standalone boss if you just beef up their health bars and scale them up a bit. At least then they'd be among company that includes someone who somehow manages to be even worse than them. Spoilers for a late game boss, but the Roquefort fight is the worst goddamn encounter in this game. I don't know what fucking knuckle-dragger thought Dragon Ball FighterZ on an 80-frame delay was the pinnacle of fight design, but fighting a boss that spends all of its time teleporting around and attacking where I was 10 seconds ago never fails to make me want to introduce an Ethernet cord to their windpipe. That'd be bad enough on its own to be the worst boss in the game by far, but Roquefort, God bless his heart, isn't satisfied with last place. He wants to set a new bar for terrible. So once he gets down to a third of his health, he reverts from giant wolf robot to frail old man, and proceeds to waste the ever-loving Christ out of your time by running away and falling out of your combos until you've played whack-a-mole enough to knock him into his next phase. It doesn't even make sense that he'd do this from a lore perspective. One second he's mouthing off about how he gets stronger the more you make him mad, and then the next he's pissing himself and screaming, "Get away from me!" Like he just forgot that he's in the— Hey, sorry to interrupt, but once you get certain enemies' health low enough, they become almost completely invulnerable and force you to stop what you're doing and play a rhythm minigame to kill them. Gotta say, it's pretty fucking annoying how often it completely breaks the flow of everything for the sake of a stupid, unwelcome gimmick. The game even has the gall to present you with this achievement when you're first introduced to the mechanic. That felt awesome? Bitch, no it didn't. That felt like a slap in the face. That felt like the game ripping the controller out of my hands and saying, "Nuh-uh, you don't get to kill this guy the normal way. He's just too strong for that." We already established that this game does a great job pushing you to finish off enemies in the coolest, most fun way possible. Why would you ruin that by taking control away from the player when they're doing well? Yeah, I know that if you just block or dodge their shockwaves when they're in this state, they'll eventually go back to normal. But that just slows things down even more, so you might as well just deal with the minigame or burn through the rest of their health with a special move, since that's the only way to deal damage to them in this state. Throughout my first playthrough, these constant interruptions whenever I fought elite enemies made me salty enough to think that I hated the Showdown mechanic entirely. But in retrospect, it becomes even more frustrating because I really don't. It's implemented just fine in certain boss fights, either as a cinematic finisher or as a break to let the combatants banter between phases, the latter of which works especially well for letting the game's dynamic soundtrack transition between different parts of the song, kinda like what Revengeance does with its soundtrack. I'm not even playing the audio, and I bet like 70% of you can hear this clip right now. Hell, even in normal gameplay there's better implementation. The security drones that force you into it during platforming sections don't do so at the expense of any existing flow or your situational awareness. And these stupid fucking birds actually use it as a counter when you try to grapple to them during certain states, making it feel like the result of your own mistake instead of a punishment for not accurately counting the damage you're doing to the tankiest enemies in the room. Honestly, the fact that I find it so annoying and intrusive is likely less a testament to its overall quality as a mechanic as much as it is how much fun I had with the core gameplay loop of zipping around and clubbing TI-84s like a technophobic caveman. Obviously, I'm gonna resent anything that gets in the way of my Oonga Boonga smash time. It's just that I'd probably resent it less if it didn't run completely counter to what makes the entire rest of the combat work for me. Now, those of you who have played the game may have noticed at this point that I've gone over just about every mechanic with the exception of chips, equipable passive abilities that you unlock and upgrade throughout the story. Truth be told, that's because it was only after my third pass through the script that I even remembered that they existed. If that's not a damning enough indicator of how wasted their potential is, then I don't know what is. Here we have a system that would have been perfect for adding unique properties to your favorite moves, shockwaves for larger AoEs, make your grapple hook pull in stunned enemies instead of pulling you to them. All kinds of interesting changes could have been made, but what we got was little more than tweaking a few variables that barely change the way you approach combat. Increased healing on pickup, increased pickup radius, earn more points. God, this shit puts me to sleep so fast I'm struggling to even think of anything worth saying about it. Look, I'm sure someone somewhere finds this stuff fun, but I'm never going to hear about someone's chip choices and think, oh, that's an interesting build. I'm gonna think, why the fuck did I have to beat the game before I was allowed to see enemy health bars? Am I being unfair? Maybe. But when a game comes this damn close to perfect for me, it's hard not to get passionate about the missteps. While Chai's moveset has a wide variety of functionality between different combos and tools, it's still ultimately pretty small. I guess you could say it's very efficiently designed in that way, but I'd hardly say efficiency is at the top of my list of priorities in a game about decommissioning Robo-Sapiens with the power of friendship and metal. And save for some pretty basic gravity manipulation, there's not really any advanced combo tech to experiment with. Which is kinda disappointing, since the DMC player in me is always gonna yearn for deeper systems and tech that makes me reconsider the direction my fingers bend to get the most out of it. It's not the deepest combat system to be sure, but upon some reflection, it's pretty clear that it's not really trying to be. After all, while I can wish for things like knockback canceling, inertia, and more varied movement options, it's hard to say with any certainty that implementing them within the confines of this rhythm-action hybrid would even work that well to begin with. And maybe that's this combat system's greatest accomplishment, that it achieves everything it sets out to do so well within the limitations of a rhythm game that an unpleasable combat snob like myself can study it for weeks and still catch himself forgetting that those limitations are even there in the first place. I never felt like I struggled to hold these two disparate elements of rhythm and action together on behalf of the game. Rather, engaging with both at the same time always felt like the only natural way to play. If I were a more pretentious asshole, I might wax poetic about how everything about the game feel, from the sights and sounds down to the way the controller rumble rhythmically pulses throughout combat, serves to make the player empathize with Nero Pilgrim and the source of his newfound superpowers. About how from the moment you pick up the controller, you can feel the music in your goddamn blood as it guides you through all 12 of the expertly crafted levels, and how you'll continue feeling that connection with it for days after you've finished as your favorite tracks endlessly play on repeat in your head. But, you know, I'm not. So instead, here's a video of some otters I saw on vacation a while back. Love these guys. Despite what my incessant nitpicking may lead you to believe, I love the hell out of this game. I feel like I could talk about it for longer than it took me to finish my first playthrough. I chose to focus on the combat partially because everyone and their dog have already done more generalized reviews, but also because these kind of stylish action games hold a really special place in my heart, and I can't help but get excited anytime something new comes along that manages to deliver on that experience. Of course, that's not to say that I'd limit my recommendation just to fans of that niche. In truth, I'd be hard-pressed to think of anyone I wouldn't recommend this game to. Not because it caters to everyone's specific tastes and preferences, but if busting the door down to a room full of enemies and hearing the opening bass riff of Invaders Must Die doesn't immediately send the writhing, withered remains of your ganglia into a controller-gripping, foot-tapping frenzy, then I'm afraid it's already too late for you.